everyone, welcome back to the class of literary readers. This is Pratibha, and today we are going to talk about the next era. This is the fifth video in the series of History of English Literature. So, today we will talk about the Age of Revival. But before that, if you are new here, then don't forget to subscribe the channel and also click the bell icon so that you would never miss any notifications from this channel. So let us begin our discussion on the Age of Revival. So before we talk about the Age of Revival, there is a period between after the Age of Chaucer, which is around 1400 to 1485, which is the Age of Revival. And this period is known as the Age of Transition. Okay, so Age of Transition jo tha, it was a kind of transition between 1400 to 1485, which is around the age of after the age of Chaucer and before the age of the revival. Now this age is known as the age of transition because it represents a bridge between two major literary and cultural periods, which I have already talked about, the medieval Chaucerian age and the English Renaissance, which is the age of revival. Now हम इसको एज ऑफ ट्रांजिशन के नाम से क्यों रेफर करते हैं? क्योंकि अर्लियर the writers used to write their works based on the theme of religion. Okay, but there was a shift from God-centered to man-centered. Earlier, the writings were used to be very religious, but during this period, एक shift आने लगा writings में, जो पहले की God-centered हुआ करती थी. Now, slowly, the writers started writing about the humanism. ठीक है, तो गॉड सेंटर्ड से मैन सेंटर्ड की ओर जो एक शिफ्ट हुआ, उसी की वजह से हम इस एज को एज ऑफ ट्रांजिशन के नाम से जानते हैं. Apart from it, if we talk about the historical background of this period, then we have Wars of the Roses. It was a kind of civil war which was fought between 1455 to 1485. Okay, so this was a kind of civil war फॉर द कंट्रोल ऑफ द इंग्लिश थ्रोन. ठीक है, इंग्लिश थ्रोन को कंट्रोल करने के लिए वॉर ऑफ रोजेस हुआ बिटवीन टू पार्टीज एंड दे आर बिटवीन द हाउस ऑफ लैंकास्टर, जिसको रिप्रेजेंट कर रहे थे हेनरी द सेवेंथ, एंड द हाउस ऑफ यॉर्क, जिसको रिप्रेजेंट कर रहे थे रिचर्ड द थर्ड. सो डू रिमेंबर that if we talk about the historical background of age of transition, there is wars of roses which was fought between 1455 to 1485. Apart from it, William Caxton introduced the printing press in England in the year 1465. So earlier the writers used to write with the hands. Okay, but after the invention of this printing press, प्रिंट कल्चर एक एस्टेब्लिश हुआ. राइटर्स जो थे अपनी वर्क्स को प्रिंटिंग के थ्रू, प्रिंटिंग प्रेस के थ्रू प्रिंट करवाने लगे. सो दैट इज वाई देयर वाज अ शिफ्ट फ्रॉम मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट कल्चर, जिसका मतलब है कि हैंड से राइटिंग्स उनके वर्क्स लिखा करते थे वो, टू प्रिंट कल्चर, because William Caxton introduced the printing press in England in 1476. And also this age is also known as the Barren Age, means in this period not such great literature was produced during this period. That is why this age is also known as the Barren Age. So do remember that age of transition, it is a period between the age of Chaucer, which is around 1400, to age of revival, which is around 1485. Historical backgrounds में you have to remember the Wars of the Roses. William Caxton introduced the printing press, and this age is also known as the Barren Age. Now let us talk about the major writers of this period. First we have Thomas Hoccleve, who has written the works Regiment of Princes, Complaint of My Lady Westmoreland. Apart from Thomas Hoccleve, we have John Ludgate from 1370 to 1451. He is a monk poet. He was a monk poet and Chaucer's literary successor. He has written these three important works: The Fall of Princes, Troy Book, The Temple of Glass. Then we have William Caxton. As I have already talked about William Caxton, that he introduced printing in England in the year 1476, and he also translated the work History of Troy in English. Apart from it, he printed some of the works by Geoffrey Chaucer, John Gower, and John Lydgate. नेक्स्ट वी हैव टॉमस मैलोरी एक वर्क है ले मोर्टे द ऑथर विच मीन डेथ ऑफ द ऑथर सो व्हाट टॉमस मैलोरी डिड he brings together many separate Arthurian romances into one unified book. So डेथ ऑफ द ऑथर जो कि एक फ्रेंच वर्क है उसमें कुछ स्टोरीज आपकी फ्रेंच में थी कुछ स्टोरीज इंग्लिश में थी सो व्हाट टॉमस मैलोरी डिड दैट उन्होंने फ्रेंच जो स्टोरीज थी उसको पहले इंग्लिश में ट्रांसलेट किया देन ही कंपाइल्ड देम इनटू वन यूनिफाइड बुक ओके सो टॉमस मैलोरी compiled and adapted French and English Arthurian romances into English prose. And later, this work, which Thomas Mallory compiled, was printed by William Caxton after the death of Thomas Mallory. Then we have English Chaucerians. Now, these writers imitated the writing style of Geoffrey Chaucer. That is why they are known as English Chaucerians, in which we have John Lydgate, Thomas Hoccleve, George Ashby, Henry Bradshaw, George Ripley, and Thomas Norton. Now, this Thomas Norton is different from the one who has written the tragedy called Gorboduc. So, don't get confused between the author of Gorboduc and this Thomas Norton, who is known as the English Chaucerians. Next, we have Scottish Chaucerians. Now, what is the difference between these two? That English Chaucerians were from England and Scottish Chaucerians were from Scotland. That is why they are known as Scottish Chaucerians. They also imitated the writing style of Geoffrey Chaucer. We have King James the First of England, then Robert Henryson, William Dunbar, and Gavin Douglas. Then we have the conclusion that during this period, there was a shift from verse romance to prose and moral writings, from oral tradition to print culture. As we have already discussed that after the invention of the printing press, uh, इस चीज ने एक तरीके से ये एक रेवोल्यूशन लेके आया in the literary culture. So we have talked about age of transition till now, in which we have talked about the historical background and some of the important facts of this period. Then we talked about the major writers. Now let us talk about the age of revival. Age of revival का जो timeline है has started from 1485 to 1557. As we have already talked about the civil wars which was fought between two parties, Richard the थर्ड जो कि थे हाउस ऑफ यॉर्क से एंड हाउस ऑफ लैंकास्टर को रिप्रेजेंट कर रहे थे हेनरी दी सेवेंथ. सो इस सिविल वॉर का एंड कैसे हुआ? दिस वाज द फाइनल बैटल जिसको हम जानते हैं बैटल ऑफ बॉसवर्थ फील्ड जो कि हुआ 1485 में. So in this battle, Richard the Third was defeated and Henry the Seventh won in this battle. So do remember about this thing that if we talk about the historical background of the Age of Revival, then final battle was fought, Bosworth Field, Battle of Bosworth Field, in which Henry the Seventh from House of Lancaster won. Apart from it, after the victory of Henry the Seventh, Tudor dynasty was established in England. Now, why this period is known as the Age of Revival? Age of Revival का मतलब है revive करना. Now, during this period, the writers revived the works which were written in the Greek language. Okay, so Greek and Roman period में जितने भी classical texts थे तो उसको इस पीरियड के जितने भी राइटर्स थे उन्होंने अपनी लैंग्वेज में उसको यूज किया उनको फिर से रिवाइव किया इन देयर वर्क्स सो दैट इज व्हाई दिस पीरियड इज नोन एज द एज ऑफ रिवाइवल and also this period establishes foundations of modern English literature In the age of Chaucer, we have seen that Chaucer wrote in the language of the common man. So during this period or after the age of Chaucer, language धीरे धीरे refine होने लगी. ठीक है? So that is why this period establishes foundations of modern English literature. So in this slide, we have talked about the important facts about the Age of Revival and also the historical background of this period. Now let us talk about the major writers of this period. First, we have John Skelton, who has written in the Skeltonic works, and he has written these two important works, the work of Philip Sparrow and Colin Clout. Apart from John Skelton, we have Thomas More, one of the most important writers in this period, and who has written this important work called Utopia in 1516. So this work was originally written in Latin in 1516, and later this work was translated in English by Ralph Robinson in the year 1551. Apart from it, we have Sir Thomas Wyatt, who introduced Petrarchan sonnet into English. And do remember this thing that Thomas Wyatt introduced Petrarchan sonnet in English, and he was the first English poet to introduce Horatian satire in English literature. His poems appeared later in Tottle's Miscellany. So Richard Tottle was a publisher, and इनके जो works थे was published in Tottle's Miscellany. Then we have Henry Howard, who is known as the Earl of Surrey. He introduced blank verse into English, and he also translated book second and book fourth of the Aeneid, which was written by the Roman writer Virgil. So Sir Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard are the founders of English Renaissance poetry because they, like Thomas Wyatt, introduced Petrarchan sonnet, and Henry Howard introduced blank verse in English literature. That is why they are known as the founders of English Renaissance poetry. Then we have Tottle's Miscellany. It was a first printed anthology of English poetry. तो रिचर्ड टोटल was a publisher. इन्होंने अपने Miscellany में कुछ writers के works को publish किया. इसका जो full title था that was Songs and Sonnets. अब published in 1557 by the publisher Richard Tottle. The anthology mainly includes poems by Sir Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard, who are known as the founders of English Renaissance poetry. Next, we have Roger Ascham, who has written the most important works like The Schoolmaster and Toxophilus. William Tyndale, who has translated Bible, the New Testament, in English language. Sir Thomas Williard, who has written the work called the book named The Governor. Then we have Nicholas Odell, who has written the first English comedy called Ralph Roister Doister. Next, we have the major impacts of the Age of Revival. Like it was a revival of classical learning, introduction of new literary forms like the sonnet was introduced by Sir Thomas Wyatt, and blank verse was introduced by Henry Howard. So that is why these two writers are known as the founders of English Renaissance poetry. Then during this period, there was a rise of humanism. Literature became more secular and man-centered. As we have seen that earlier, the writers wrote their works based on the theme of God, religion. Now during this period, राइटर्स जो थे उनके जो वर्क्स थे वो धीरे धीरे गॉड सेंटर्ड से मैन सेंटर्ड होने लगे. अपार्ट फ्रॉम इट, वर्क्स लाइक यूटोपिया एंड स्कूल मास्टर established English prose as a serious literary medium. So in this video we have talked about the age of transition. Let us quickly revise. Age of transition from 1400 to 1485. Here is the historical background of this period. William Caxton introduced printing press. Then some of the most important writers during age of transition. Then we talked about the age of revival, that during this period the writers revived the Greek and Latin classics. Then we talked about the major writers like we have Thomas More's Utopia, uh, Henry Howard and Thomas Fiat, who has introduced the Petrarchan sonnet into English. And these two writers are known as the founders of English Renaissance poetry. Then we talked about Richard Total Smith's Salini, in which we have works, poems by Henry Howard and Sir Thomas Wyatt. Then some of the major writers of this period: Schoolmaster by Roger Ascham, First English Comedy, Ralph Royster Doyster, written by Nicholas Odell. And here is the major impacts of the Age of Revival. So I hope that this video will definitely help you out. And if you have any question or any suggestion regarding this video, you can let me know in the comment section down below. Till then, keep learning and keep watching Literary Readers. I will meet soon in the next video.